A billionaire was turned away from her own restaurant, and no one recognized her. On the night of her birthday, Victoria Hale, a billionaire who owned half the city, was denied a table at her own restaurant. No one knew who she was. No one cared. Until a quiet single dad named Marcus looked up, saw her standing alone, and said, "Sit with us." What started as a small act of kindness would spiral into something neither of them could control, costing him everything, and forcing her to question the one thing money could never buy: what it really means to matter. The rain came down in a soft, steady curtain, turning the Chicago skyline into a blur of glass and light. From the rooftop of Maison Alder, the city usually looked like power, sharp, controlled, glowing with purpose. Tonight, it looked distant, unreachable. Victoria Hale stood just inside the entrance, the warm golden light of the restaurant brushing against her gray coat without ever quite welcoming her in. Her hair was loose, slightly damp from the walk. No jewelry, no driver waiting outside, no signal, not a single one that she owned the building beneath her feet or the entire chain it belonged to. The host gave her a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "I don't," Victoria said, her voice calm, almost curious. "I was hoping you might have something available." The host glanced at the screen in front of him for less than a second, then back at her. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone polite but final. "We're fully booked tonight." There was no hesitation, no checking with a manager, no consideration, just a clean, quiet dismissal. Victoria nodded once, as if she'd expected it, though the faint tightening in her chest said otherwise. She stepped aside, out of the flow of arriving guests, her shoes barely making a sound on the polished marble floor. Behind her, the door opened again. Laughter came in first, loud, confident, the kind that assumed it belonged anywhere it landed. Two men, two women, dressed in sharp lines and expensive fabrics, walked in without slowing down. "Hey, any chance you can squeeze us in?" one of the men said casually, already halfway inside. The host's posture changed instantly. His smile warmed, his shoulders relaxed. "Of course," he said, tapping quickly at the screen. "Let me see what we can do." Victoria didn't move. She didn't turn, but she listened. "Well, we're pretty tight tonight," the host continued, though his voice carried a different tone now, accommodating, eager. "But I can arrange something by the garden view. Give me just a moment." Within seconds, a server appeared. Chairs were shifted. A table, previously unavailable, came to life. The group was guided in, their laughter echoing softly as they disappeared deeper into the restaurant, into a space that had just moments ago been closed to her. Victoria remained where she was. The rain tapped gently against the tall windows. Glasses clinked in the distance. A low hum of conversation filled the room, blending into something smooth and controlled. The kind of atmosphere she had spent years perfecting, curating down to the smallest detail. And yet standing there now, she felt completely outside of it. No one looked at her, not the host, not the servers weaving between tables, not the manager who stepped out briefly to greet the newly seated guests with a handshake and a wide, welcoming smile. She could have spoken up. She could have said her name. She could have watched the entire room shift in an instant. Apologies, rearrangements, the sudden awareness of who she was and what she represented. But she didn't. Because this was the question she had come here to answer. If no one knew who she was, would anyone treat her like she mattered? The answer stood quietly in front of her, unmistakable. No. Victoria let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It left her chest heavier than it should have, settling somewhere deeper than discomfort. Something closer to recognition. For years, every room had opened for her. Every table prepared. Every conversation adjusted to fit her presence. But none of it, she realized now, had anything to do with her. It was the title, the wealth, the invisible weight of influence that walked in before she did. Strip that away, and she was just another woman in a gray coat, standing near the door. Waiting. Invisible. She took a step toward the exit, the decision forming quietly. It would be easy to leave, to walk back out into the rain, into the city that still belonged to her in every measurable way. To return to the penthouse, the silence, the familiar distance. But something held her there. Not hope, not expectation. Just the need to sit with the feeling a little longer, to understand it, to be certain. A server passed by her without slowing, carrying a tray of wine glasses that caught the light like small, flickering stars. The scent of roasted garlic and butter drifted from the kitchen, warm and inviting, in a way the room itself was not. Victoria shifted slightly, moving closer to the wall, out of the path of the staff. She folded her hands in front of her, steady, composed. Unseen. Across the room, near the back where the lighting softened and the tables grew smaller, someone noticed. He had been sitting there quietly, his chair angled just enough to give him a view of the entrance without making it obvious. A man in his late 30s, broad-shouldered, wearing a collared shirt that had been pressed carefully but carried the faint signs of long use. Marcus Reed didn't usually come to places like this. Tonight was different. Across from him, his daughter leaned over the table, studying the menu with the kind of focus that made everything else in the world fade away. Her small fingers traced the words slowly, sounding them out under her breath. "Dad," she said after a moment, her voice soft but certain. "That lady's still standing there." Marcus followed her gaze. He had seen it from the beginning. The way the host looked at her. The quick dismissal. The shift in tone when the other group walked in. He had seen it because he knew that look. He had been on the receiving end of it more times than he could count. Different reasons. Same outcome. He watched Victoria now as she stood near the wall, still, composed, trying to disappear in a room that had already decided she didn't belong. Something in his chest tightened. He looked back at his daughter. Zoe had stopped reading. Her eyes were fixed on the woman by the door, her expression thoughtful in that quiet, unfiltered way children have when they're trying to understand something adults pretend not to see. "Why won't they let her sit?" she asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. Because the truth was complicated. And tonight wasn't supposed to be about that. He had saved for this dinner. Weeks of setting aside small amounts, skipping things he didn't need, making sure this one night would feel different for her. He glanced at the table. The food had just arrived. Warm, simple. Enough. He could stay where he was. Finish the meal. Let someone else handle it. That's what most people in the room were doing. Looking, and then looking away. Marcus leaned back slightly in his chair, his fingers resting against the edge of the table. He told himself it wasn't his responsibility, that stepping in might make things awkward, that maybe she didn't want help. That maybe... "Dad," Zoe said again, quieter this time. "She looks like she's trying not to leave." Marcus looked at her, then back at the woman by the door. The rain outside pressed harder against the windows now, streaking the glass in long, uneven lines. The city lights blurred further, turning everything into something softer, less defined. Inside, nothing had changed. Victoria still stood there, unseen. Marcus exhaled slowly. Then he pushed his chair back. Zoe's eyes lifted, following him as he stood. "Stay here," he said gently. He picked up his napkin, set it neatly beside his plate, and turned toward the front of the room. A few heads shifted as he walked past, some curious, most uninterested. Victoria didn't notice him at first, not until he stopped a few feet away, giving her just enough space. "Ma'am," he said quietly. She turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He wasn't dressed for a place like this, not really. His presence didn't carry weight in the way the others did. No expectation followed him. Just a man, standing there. But he didn't look away. "We've got an extra seat," he said, nodding back toward his table. "If you'd like to sit." No explanation, no performance. Just an offer. Simple, direct, unconditional. Victoria held his gaze, and for the first time that night, someone had actually seen her. The room around them continued as if nothing had changed. But something had. Because in a space filled with people who had already decided she didn't matter, one person hadn't. And the question shifted. Not whether she belonged there, but whether she would stay. Victoria didn't answer right away. The offer hung between them, simple and unpolished, untouched by the careful language she was used to. No one had ever offered her anything like that before, not without knowing exactly who she was, not without something attached. "I don't want to intrude," she said finally, her voice measured, almost cautious. "You wouldn't be," Marcus replied. "We just got here." He didn't smile to soften it, didn't lean in, didn't try to convince her. He just stood there, steady, like a man who meant what he said and didn't need it to be accepted to remain true. Victoria glanced past him, toward the small table near the back. The girl, Zoe, was watching them now, her chin slightly raised, her eyes curious but not shy. There was no judgment in her expression, just openness. Victoria looked back at Marcus. The rain pressed harder against the glass behind her, tapping in uneven rhythms. Somewhere deeper in the restaurant, someone laughed too loudly. A server rushed past with a tray balanced carefully in one hand. Everything continued. Except this moment. She nodded. "All right," she said. Marcus stepped aside without another word, giving her space to walk ahead if she wanted. She didn't. They moved together, quietly, back through the narrow space between tables. Victoria could feel the occasional glance as they passed. Not recognition, just the subtle awareness people had when something didn't quite fit. A woman in a plain coat walking beside a man who didn't belong here either, heading toward the least desirable table in the room. The table no one had tried to take. Zoe straightened as they approached, setting her menu down carefully. "Hi," she said, her voice clear and direct. "Hi," Victoria replied, pulling out the empty chair across from her. "Today's my birthday," Zoe added, like it was the most important piece of information in the world. Victoria paused, her hand resting lightly on the back of the chair. "It is?" she said. "Happy birthday." Zoe studied her for a second longer than most people would have allowed themselves. "Is it yours too?" she asked. Victoria blinked. "Why would you think that?" Zoe shrugged, small shoulders lifting under her lavender dress. "You look like people do when it's their birthday," she said, But no one knows. Marcus exhaled softly through his nose, almost a laugh, but not quite. "Zoe," he said, not scolding, just grounding. "It's okay," Victoria said quickly. Because it was. Because it wasn't wrong. She lowered herself into the chair, smoothing her coat as she sat. The table was smaller than anything she had used in years, close enough that she could see the faint pencil marks on Zoe's fingers, the worn edge of Marcus's sleeve where it met his wrist. Details she would have missed before. Details that suddenly felt important. "I guess you're right," Victoria said after a moment. Zoe nodded once, satisfied. "I can tell," she said. Marcus shook his head lightly, reaching for his glass of water. "She notices things," he said, "more than she probably should." Victoria looked at him. "That's not a bad thing." "No," Marcus said. "It's not." For a moment no one spoke. The server approached, hesitating just slightly as she took in the new arrangement. Her eyes flicked from Marcus to Victoria, then to Zoe, trying to place the dynamic. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, her tone polite but uncertain. Victoria opened her mouth, then paused. For years, she hadn't ordered her own drink in places like this. Someone else always handled it. It was a small thing, but now it felt like a choice. "Water's fine," she said. The server nodded, jotting it down before stepping away. Zoe leaned forward, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "The lemonade's really good," she said. Victoria smiled faintly. "I'll try that next time." "You should," Zoe said seriously. Marcus picked up his fork again, cutting into his food without ceremony. "You sure you're okay sitting back here?" he asked, glancing up at Victoria. "It's not much of a view." Victoria followed his gaze to the window beside them. The glass was streaked with rain, the city beyond blurred into soft lines of light. "It's better than where I was standing," she said. Marcus nodded once, accepting that. They began to eat. At first, the conversation stayed light, carried mostly by Zoe, who moved from one topic to another with the easy confidence of someone who didn't second-guess her place in the world. She talked about school, about her teacher, Mr. Holloway, who she liked most days, about a science project involving plants that she was still deciding how to approach. Marcus listened, adding small comments here and there, never interrupting, never redirecting. When Zoe laughed, he laughed with her, fully, without checking who might be watching. Victoria found herself watching him in those moments. The way he leaned back slightly when he smiled, the way his shoulders relaxed when his daughter spoke, the way he didn't seem to care at all about the room around them. It wasn't indifference. It was something else, something steadier. "You don't come to places like this often," Victoria said, the observation slipping out before she could stop it. Marcus glanced up, meeting her eyes. "No," he said simply. "But you came tonight." Zoe answered for him. "He saved up," she said proudly, "for like a whole month." Marcus gave her a look, not annoyed, just a quiet signal. "It's her birthday," he said. "Seemed worth it." Victoria felt something shift in her chest. Worth it. Such a small phrase. Such a different scale. She thought about the dinners she'd attended over the years, the ones with curated menus and carefully selected guest lists, the ones that cost more than most people made in a month. None of them had felt like this. None of them had felt worth it. "Do you like it?" Zoe asked, tilting her head. "The restaurant?" Victoria hesitated. "It's beautiful," she said. "That's not what I asked," Zoe replied. Marcus let out a quiet laugh this time. "She means the food," he translated. Victoria picked up her fork, tasting a bite of the dish Marcus had recommended without thinking. It was good. But that wasn't the answer. I like this table, she said instead. Zoe smiled. Me too. For a while, they ate in a kind of easy rhythm. The noise of the restaurant faded into the background, replaced by smaller sounds. The scrape of a fork against a plate. The soft hum of conversation between just three people. No one interrupted them. No one asked questions. No one came over to correct the situation. It was as if the rest of the room had decided they didn't matter enough to notice. And for the first time that night, Victoria didn't mind. She found herself relaxing into the space, her shoulders lowering, her breathing evening out. The tension she hadn't realized she was carrying began to loosen piece by piece. Zoe reached into her small bag and pulled out a worn notebook, flipping it open to a blank page. "Can I draw you?" she asked, looking at Victoria with that same steady curiosity. Victoria blinked, caught off guard. "Draw me?" "I draw people I want to remember," Zoe said. "It helps." Marcus glanced over, a hint of pride in his expression. "She's good," he said. "Better than I was at her age." Victoria looked at the notebook, then back at Zoe. "You might be disappointed," she said. "I won't," Zoe replied. "I already decided." There was no argument to be made against that. Victoria nodded. "All right." Zoe leaned over the table, her pencil moving quickly, confidently. She didn't look up much, only occasionally glancing at Victoria's face before returning to the page. Victoria sat still. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. Across from her, Marcus watched the scene unfold with quiet attention, not evaluating, not judging, just present. "You don't ask a lot of questions," Victoria said after a moment. Marcus shrugged slightly. "Didn't seem necessary." "You don't want to know who I am?" He met her eyes again. "If you want to tell me, you will," he said. "If you don't, that's fine too." No curiosity driven by advantage. No attempt to place her. Just acceptance. Victoria looked down at the table, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass. In every other room, her identity had been the starting point. Here, it didn't seem to matter. Zoe finished the drawing, tearing the page carefully from the notebook. She slid it across the table. "So you don't forget," she said. Victoria picked it up. It was simple. Lines and shading, nothing overly detailed, but something about it felt accurate in a way that went beyond appearance. Zoe had captured her eyes, not the way they looked, the way they felt. Victoria swallowed, her throat tightening slightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. Zoe nodded, already closing the notebook. Outside, the rain began to slow, the rhythm against the windows softening into a steady whisper. Inside, the restaurant continued as it always had. But at a small table near the back wall, something had shifted. Victoria didn't know what would happen when she left. Didn't know what this meant. Didn't know if she would ever see them again. But she knew one thing. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for the night to end. And somewhere, just beneath that realization, a question began to form. What happens when you find something real, in a place where nothing is supposed to be? The question stayed with Victoria long after the plates were cleared. Dinner stretched longer than it should have, not because the food demanded it, but because no one seemed in a hurry to leave. The restaurant around them moved on. Tables filled, emptied, reset, but their small corner felt untouched by the rhythm of it. Zoe talked, not in a way that filled silence, but in a way that made silence unnecessary. She told stories about school, about a spelling test she thought she'd mostly passed, about a boy who kept trying to trade snacks, even though she didn't like what he brought. Marcus listened the whole time, steady and patient, stepping in only when needed. He didn't interrupt her, didn't correct her unless it mattered. He just stayed present. Victoria found herself doing the same. At some point, she stopped checking the room, stopped noticing who was watching, stopped wondering if anyone recognized her. It didn't seem important anymore. The server returned with the check, placing it quietly near Marcus's elbow. He reached for it without hesitation. Victoria noticed. "You don't have to," she began. "I know," Marcus said, not looking up, "but I do." There was no edge in it, no defensiveness, just a simple statement of fact. Victoria paused. In her world, the check was never something anyone reached for. It was handled before it arrived, accounted for before the first glass was poured. Here, it was part of the moment, part of the effort. She leaned back slightly, letting him take it. Zoe swung her legs lightly under the table, watching both of them with quiet interest. "Are you going to come back?" she asked suddenly, looking at Victoria. The question landed gently, but it stayed. Victoria met her eyes. "I don't know," she said honestly. Zoe considered that. "You should," she said. "You looked less sad after you sat down." Marcus gave her a look, softer this time. "Zoe." "I'm just saying," she replied, unbothered. Victoria smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'll have to think about it." They stood together near the exit a few minutes later. The rain had slowed to a mist, leaving the streets outside glossy and reflective under the city lights. Cars moved past in soft streaks of red and white, the sound of tires against wet pavement blending into the night. Zoe hugged her notebook to her chest, stepping carefully over the threshold. "Happy birthday," she said again, like it mattered more now than it had before. "Thank you," Victoria replied. Marcus nodded once, hands in his jacket pockets. "Take care," he said. No exchange of numbers, no offer to follow up, just an ending that didn't try to extend itself. Victoria stepped out into the night, the cool air brushing against her face. She walked a few paces before stopping, turning back for just a moment. Marcus was already guiding Zoe down the sidewalk, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. They moved easily together, like they had done this 1,000 times before. They didn't look back. Victoria watched until they disappeared around the corner. Then she turned and walked in the opposite direction. Her building rose above the city like a statement. Glass and steel, clean lines, controlled entry. The doorman straightened as she approached, recognition flashing instantly across his face. "Ms. Hale," he said, stepping forward to open the door. "Happy birthday." The words landed differently now. "Thank you," she said, her voice even. Inside, everything was exactly as she had left it. Quiet, ordered, predictable. The elevator ride to the penthouse was smooth, silent. The city fell away beneath her as the doors slid open, revealing a space designed to impress and isolate in equal measure. Victoria stepped inside, setting her coat aside. No music, no voices, just the faint hum of the building and the distant echo of traffic far below. She walked to the window, looking out over the skyline. From here, everything looked perfect, untouched, but the feeling from the restaurant followed her. Not the embarrassment, not the moment at the door. Something else, something quieter. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper Zoe had given her. The drawing. Victoria smoothed it out carefully on the kitchen counter. The lines were simple, slightly uneven in places, but the eyes, the way Zoe had drawn them, held something that made Victoria pause. Not sadness, not exactly. Something closer to being seen. She rested her fingertips lightly against the page. For years, her life had been built on control. Every outcome anticipated, every risk calculated, every interaction shaped by who she was in the world. Tonight had been the opposite. Unplanned, uncontrolled, real. Victoria exhaled slowly, leaning back against the counter. She thought about Marcus, the way he had offered the seat without hesitation, the way he hadn't asked a single question that mattered to her status, the way he had looked at her, directly, without assumption. And then she thought about what she hadn't told him, who she was, what she owned, what she could change with a single call. The contrast sat heavily in her chest, because for a brief moment, none of that had mattered. She picked up her phone, turning it over in her hand. It would be easy to find him. A name, a license, a few calls. People in her position didn't lose track of others unless they chose to. Victoria stared at the screen, her thumb hovering just above it. Then she set it down. Not yet. She moved back to the window, watching the city breathe below her. 3 miles away, in a smaller space with dimmer lights and thinner walls, a man and his daughter were probably finishing their night in a way that made sense to them. No headlines, no expectations, just life. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. For the first time in years, her birthday hadn't felt like something to endure. It had felt like something she had almost missed, and that realization carried a weight she couldn't ignore. Because now the question had changed. Not whether she had been seen, but whether she was willing to see. Across the city, Marcus unlocked the door to his apartment, flicking on the light with a quiet click. The space was small, clean, lived in. Zoe dropped her shoes near the door, already talking. That was the best dinner, she said, setting her notebook on the table. Not because of the food. Marcus smiled faintly, hanging up his jacket. I figured. She was nice, Zoe added. Different, but nice. Marcus nodded. Yeah, he said. He moved to the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, his thoughts quieter now. Something about the night lingered. Not unusual, just unfinished. Zoe climbed onto a chair, flipping open her notebook again. I'm glad you asked her to sit, she said, not looking up. Marcus leaned against the counter. Me too. Zoe glanced at him. You almost didn't. He let out a small breath. I know. Why? Marcus considered the question. Because it would have been easier not to. Because stepping in meant stepping out of the line he'd learned to stay within. Because people didn't always respond the way you hoped. All kinds of reasons, he said finally. Zoe nodded, accepting that without needing more. Well, she said, picking up her pencil, you did. Marcus watched her for a moment, then looked toward the window. The rain had nearly stopped. The city outside felt quieter now, but something had shifted. He didn't know what it meant yet, didn't know if it would matter tomorrow or the day after. But he knew this, sometimes the smallest choices didn't stay small, and somewhere, just beyond what he could see, that choice was already moving. Morning came early in Marcus Reed's world. Not gently, not slowly. It arrived with the sound of pipes rattling behind thin apartment walls, with footsteps overhead, with the distant groan of a city already in motion before the sun had fully decided to rise. Marcus was up before it. He stood in the narrow kitchen, the light above the sink casting a dull glow across chipped countertops and a stack of dishes he hadn't had time to finish the night before. The coffee maker clicked softly, struggling through its process like it understood exactly how tired he was. He leaned one hand against the counter, eyes half closed, letting the warmth of the mug settle into his palm. For a moment, he let himself be still. Then he moved. Zoe's alarm went off from the bedroom, a soft melody she had chosen herself. Not loud, but persistent. He heard her shift, the quiet rustle of blankets, the small pause before she reached out to turn it off. "Zoe," he called gently. "Up." "I'm up," she called back, though her voice still carried sleep. Marcus allowed himself a faint smile. He moved through the routine the way he always did. Efficient, practiced, lunch packed, backpack checked, shoes by the door. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and steady mattered. Zoe appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, hair still slightly uneven from sleep, her notebook already tucked under her arm. "You're thinking," she said, watching him. Marcus glanced up. "What makes you say that?" "You do that thing," she said, mimicking his expression with surprising accuracy, brows slightly drawn, eyes focused somewhere beyond the room, like you're looking at something that's not here. Marcus let out a quiet breath. "Just a long day ahead," he said. Zoe didn't argue, but she didn't look convinced either. By the time Marcus stepped out onto the street, the city had fully woken up. Cold air moved between buildings, carrying the scent of damp pavement and something faintly metallic. Cars passed in steady lines, headlights cutting through the gray morning. Somewhere down the block, a bus hissed to a stop, doors folding open with a mechanical sigh. Marcus adjusted his jacket and started walking. His first job site was across town, a half-finished renovation project where deadlines mattered more than comfort. He had been working there for 3 weeks now, pulling wires through walls that weren't quite ready, fixing problems that had already been fixed once, correcting mistakes no one else wanted to claim. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. And right now, that was enough. As he reached the site, the foreman, Gerald, stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand. "You're late," Gerald said without looking up. Marcus checked his watch. "I'm on time." Gerald glanced at him briefly, then back at the paper. "Then be earlier." Marcus didn't respond. He had learned a long time ago that some conversations weren't worth having. Inside, the building smelled like dust and insulation, the air thick with the quiet chaos of construction. Tools clanged, voices echoed. Somewhere, a radio played low enough to be ignored. Marcus set his bag down and got to work. Hands steady, movements precise. The kind of work that didn't draw attention when done right, but caused problems when it wasn't. Around him, conversations drifted in and out. Talk of contracts, of hours, of things that didn't include him. That was normal. He kept his head down. By noon, his shirt clung slightly to his back, the effort of the morning settling into his muscles. He stepped outside for a break, leaning against the cool brick wall, letting the air clear his head. A few of the other workers stood nearby, talking. "Heard they're opening another one downtown," one of them said. "Some fancy place. Same group as that rooftop spot." Marcus didn't react. He didn't need to. But something in the conversation tugged at his attention anyway. "Yeah," another voice added. Those places don't stay open without someone big behind them. Marcus took a sip of water, staring out at the street. He thought about the restaurant, about the woman in the gray coat, about the way she had sat at their table like it mattered. He shook the thought off. It didn't connect. Not yet. Across the city, Victoria Hale sat at the head of a long conference table, the room around her filled with glass walls and quiet authority. The skyline stretched behind her, sharp and clear in the daylight. Assistants moved in and out, screens flickered with data, voices carried just enough to be heard when needed. Everything was exactly as it should be. Controlled, structured, predictable. Expansion into 2 additional markets by Q3, one of her executives was saying, gesturing toward a presentation that filled the far wall. If we maintain current projections, Victoria nodded once, signaling for him to continue. Her posture was perfect, her expression neutral, every movement precise. No one in the room would have guessed where she had been the night before. No one would have guessed what had changed. But it had. In small, quiet ways. Ways that didn't show on reports or projections. Ways that didn't belong in rooms like this. She glanced down at the file in front of her, the numbers blurring slightly as her mind drifted. Not away. Just somewhere else. To a smaller table. To a girl with a notebook. To a man who hadn't asked her name. Victoria straightened, refocusing. "Let's move on," she said, her voice steady. The meeting continued. But something in her attention had shifted. That afternoon, she sat alone in her office, the city stretching out beneath her once again. The file lay open on her desk. Not a business report. Not a contract. A different kind of information. Marcus Reed, age 38. Licensed electrician. 2 current jobs. No violations. No complaints. A daughter. 8 years old. The details were simple, clean, efficient. But they didn't tell the whole story. They couldn't. Victoria leaned back in her chair, the paper resting lightly between her fingers. She hadn't meant to look him up. Not at first, but the question had stayed with her, and questions, in her world, didn't remain unanswered for long. She read the file again, then set it down. Something about it felt incomplete, not inaccurate, just insufficient. Because none of it explained what she had seen at that table. None of it explained why a man with that kind of life would stand up for someone he didn't know, would offer something without asking for anything in return. Victoria stood, moving toward the window. The city moved below her, unaware, unchanged. 3 miles. That was all the distance between this world and his. 3 miles, and everything in between. She reached for her phone, paused, then dialed. "Find me more," she said when the line connected. Not records. Context. There was a brief pause on the other end. "Of course, Ms. Hale." Victoria ended the call, her reflection faint in the glass before her. She studied it for a moment, then looked past it. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't looking for a transaction. She was looking for understanding. And somewhere, in a smaller part of the city, a man who had already moved on from that night was about to become part of something he hadn't chosen. Something that had already begun. Marcus didn't feel it yet, didn't see it coming. But the quiet balance of his life, the routines, the stability he had built piece by piece, was about to be tested. Not by something he had done wrong, but by something he had done right. Marcus didn't feel it yet. The next few days passed the way his days always did, measured in hours, in tasks, in the quiet discipline of getting through what needed to be done. Work, home, Zoe, repeat. The rhythm held. Until it didn't. It started on a Thursday afternoon. The job site had slowed, the kind of lull that came when one phase ended and the next hadn't quite begun. Marcus was kneeling near an open panel, tracing a line of wiring that refused to behave the way it should. "Reed?" Gerald called from across the room. Marcus didn't look up right away. "Yeah?" "You got a call?" Marcus frowned slightly. "No one calls me here." Gerald shrugged, already turning away. Then it must be important. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag, standing slowly. There was a landline near the front office, old, mounted to the wall, the kind that didn't ring unless someone had gone out of their way to make it happen. He picked up the receiver. Marcus Reed. A brief pause. Then a woman's voice. Calm, clear. "Hi. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Marcus recognized it before she finished the sentence. Victoria. He straightened slightly, instinct more than intention. "No," he said. "You're not." Another pause. "I wasn't sure if I should call," she admitted, "but I thought it might be better than not." Marcus leaned against the wall, his free hand resting loosely at his side. "What can I do for you?" There was no edge in his tone, no expectation, just a question. "I wanted to thank you," she said, properly. "You already did," Marcus replied. "I don't think I did." He let that sit for a second. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "That night wasn't about that." "I know," she said quietly. "That's part of why I'm calling." Marcus looked down at the concrete floor, tracing a crack with his eyes. There was something different in her voice now, less controlled, more human. "I was wondering," she continued, "if you'd be open to meeting again. Just for coffee. Somewhere you're comfortable." Marcus didn't answer right away. He thought about Zoe. About the way she had talked about Victoria after that night. She was nice, as she had said. You should see her again. He thought about the way the evening had ended clean, simple, untouched by complication. And he thought about what happened when things like that didn't stay simple. "Why?" he asked finally. Victoria didn't hesitate. "Because I'd like to understand something I don't," she said. "And I think you might be able to help me with that." Marcus let out a quiet breath. Honest. At least it sounded that way. He pushed himself off the wall. "There's a diner on Halsted," he said. "Corner of 9th. Nothing fancy." "That sounds perfect," she replied. "Saturday morning," he added. 9. I'll be there." The line went quiet. Marcus held the receiver for a second longer, then hung it up. When he turned back toward the main floor, Gerald was watching him. "That your girl?" Gerald asked, half smirking. Marcus didn't react. "Just someone I met," he said. Gerald chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah," he said. "All right." Marcus went back to work. But something in the day had shifted. Saturday came with a gray sky and the promise of rain that hadn't quite arrived yet. The diner sat exactly where Marcus had said it would. Small, worn, the kind of place that had been there long enough to feel permanent. The bell above the door rang softly as he stepped inside. Coffee and bacon hit the air first, then the low hum of conversation. Victoria was already there. She sat near the window, a simple cup of coffee in front of her, hands wrapped loosely around it like she wasn't entirely sure what to do with them. She wasn't dressed for attention. No tailored suit, no statement pieces, just a dark sweater, her hair pulled back, her posture relaxed in a way Marcus hadn't seen before. She looked different, not smaller, just less guarded. Marcus approached, sliding into the seat across from her. "You're early," he said. She smiled faintly. "I didn't want to be late." The waitress appeared almost immediately, setting a menu down in front of him. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Black. No extras." The waitress nodded, moving away. For a moment, they just sat there. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't empty either. "I meant what I said," Victoria began, "about wanting to thank you." Marcus nodded. "I heard you." "And I also meant what I said about understanding something," she added. He leaned back slightly. "What's that?" Victoria looked down at her cup, then back up at him. "Why you stood up," she said, "that night." Marcus didn't answer immediately. He could have said a lot of things, could have explained it in a way that made sense in a room like hers. But that wouldn't have been true. "My daughter was watching," he said instead. Victoria held his gaze. "That's it?" "That's enough," Marcus replied. The waitress returned, setting his coffee down with a small nod. He wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the warmth settle in. Victoria watched him for a moment. "You didn't know who I was," she said. "No." "You didn't ask." "No. Most people would have." Marcus shrugged slightly. Most people don't matter in that moment. She tilted her head, considering that. "What does?" He took a sip of his coffee. "What kind of person she thinks I am," he said. "That's it." Victoria glanced down, her fingers tightening slightly around her cup. "And what kind of person is that?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "The kind who doesn't look away." The words landed quietly, but they stayed. Victoria exhaled slowly, leaning back in her seat. "I've spent a long time in rooms where people only look at what they can get," she said. "From me, from each other." Marcus nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I figured." She studied him for a moment. "You're not curious?" "About what?" "Who I am, what I do." Marcus met her eyes again. "You'll tell me if it matters," he said. "And if it doesn't, then it doesn't." Simple. Direct. Unmoved. Victoria let out a soft breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "That's new." Marcus smiled faintly. "Probably." They talked for a while after that. About Zoe, about work, about small things that didn't carry weight outside the moment. Victoria asked questions, but not the kind she usually asked. Not probing, not strategic. Just interested. And Marcus answered them the way he always did. Straight. No performance. At some point, someone at a nearby table looked over a little too long, then another. A phone appeared. Subtle at first, then not. Victoria noticed it. Marcus did too. Neither of them said anything. But something shifted. The air changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. A reminder. That moments like this didn't stay private for long. Marcus set his cup down. "I should get going soon," he said. Victoria nodded. "Of course." They stood together outside a few minutes later, the gray sky pressing low above them. The city moved around them, unaware, unconcerned. "Thank you," Victoria said again, "for meeting me." Marcus nodded once. "Take care," he replied. He turned to leave, then paused. "Hey," he said, glancing back. "Yeah?" He hesitated for just a second, then shook his head. "Nothing," he said. "Just be careful." Victoria watched him walk away, the words settling in a place she didn't fully understand yet. Be careful. She had spent her life controlling outcomes, managing risks, moving through the world with precision. And yet, for the first time in a long time, she had stepped into something she didn't control. And somewhere, just beyond what either of them could see, that moment had already been noticed, already been captured, already been turned into something else, something neither of them had agreed to, something that was about to change everything. It surfaced quietly at first. A small website, a headline written to be noticed, not understood. No one tagged Marcus in it, no one called to confirm anything. It simply appeared, as these things often do, fast, careless, and already spreading by the time anyone realized it existed. Billionaire Victoria Hale spotted with mystery man at local diner. The photo sat just beneath the headline. Grainy, cropped, taken from an angle that suggested distance but not enough distance to hide intent. Victoria, seated by the window, Marcus across from her, leaning slightly forward, 2 cups of coffee between them. It looked like something it wasn't. And that was enough. Marcus didn't see it right away. His morning had started the same as always. Zoe at the table, cereal half-eaten, her notebook open beside her. The television hummed quietly in the background, tuned to a morning news station neither of them was really watching. "You're thinking again," Zoe said, glancing up at him. Marcus gave her a look. "You say that like it's new." "It's not new," she said. "It's just more." He reached for his keys, slipping them into his pocket. "Finish your breakfast," he said. "Bus comes in 10, Zoe nodded, already turning back to her notebook. Marcus stepped outside, the air colder than the day before. The sky had that flat, gray look that meant winter wasn't far off. He didn't check his phone. Didn't need to. The world had a way of finding him when it wanted to. It found him at the job site. Gerald was waiting near the entrance, his expression different this time. Not annoyed. Not rushed. Something else. "You got a minute?" Gerald asked. Marcus slowed. "Yeah." Gerald didn't speak right away. He just held up his phone, screen facing Marcus. Marcus looked, and for a second, didn't understand what he was seeing. Then he did. The photo. The headline. The way the words twisted something simple into something else entirely. He took a breath, slow and controlled. "It's not what it looks like," he said. Gerald nodded once, like he believed him. "Maybe not," he said. "But that's not really the point, is it?" Marcus met his eyes. "What is?" Gerald sighed, rubbing a hand over the back of his neck. "Phones have been ringing," he said. "Clients asking questions, people trying to connect dots that don't exist." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. There's nothing to connect. "I know that," Gerald replied. "But they don't. And right now, perception matters more than truth." Marcus looked back at the screen, at the version of himself staring back. a version he didn't recognize. "You think I'm using her," he said quietly. "I think people are going to think that," Gerald corrected, "and I can't have that kind of noise on a project this size." Marcus let the words settle. Not anger. Not yet. Just wait. "So what are you saying?" Gerald hesitated, then didn't. "I'm saying take a few days," he said. "Let this die down." Marcus nodded slowly. "And if it doesn't?" Gerald didn't answer. He didn't have to. At school, Zoe felt it before she understood it. It started with whispers, then looks, then a teacher asking her to stay behind after class, her voice soft but too careful. "Everything okay at home?" the teacher asked. Zoe blinked. "Yeah," she said. The teacher smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "If you need to talk about anything..." Zoe shook her head. "I'm okay." But something had changed. She could feel it. The way kids looked at her now, like they knew something she didn't. Victoria saw it in a different way. Her assistant placed the tablet on her desk without a word, the screen already open. Victoria glanced at it. Read the headline once, then again. Her expression didn't change, but her hand tightened slightly around the edge of the desk. "How widespread?" she asked. "Not major outlets yet," her assistant said, "but it's picking up." Victoria nodded. "Have legal look into it," she said, quietly. "Of course." The assistant hesitated. "There's more," she added. Victoria looked up. "The man in the photo," the assistant said. "Marcus Reed. We've confirmed his identity." Victoria didn't respond. "He's already being contacted," the assistant continued. "Press, local. Nothing serious yet, but..." Victoria held up a hand. "That's enough." The room went still. "Handle it," she said. "Yes, ma'am." The assistant left. Victoria remained where she was, the screen still glowing in front of her. She stared at the image, at the moment that had felt untouched, now turned into something else, something loud, something invasive, something that didn't belong to either of them anymore. She reached out and turned the screen off, but the image stayed. That evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, his phone face down in front of him. Zoe was quieter than usual. She picked at her food, her notebook closed for once. "You're thinking again," she said finally. Marcus looked up. "Yeah," he admitted. Zoe studied him. "Is it about the lady?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Yeah," he said. Zoe nodded slowly. "I think people are being weird about it," she said. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. People get weird about things they don't understand. Zoe tilted her head. "Do you understand it?" Marcus let out a quiet breath. "No," he said. "Not yet." Silence settled between them. Not heavy, just uncertain. "Are you in trouble?" Zoe asked softly. Marcus looked at her. Really looked. "No," he said. "Not because of anything I did." Zoe seemed to think about that. "Then why does it feel like you are?" Marcus didn't have an answer. Not one that would make sense. Not one that would make it better. He reached across the table, resting his hand lightly over hers. "We're okay," he said. Zoe nodded, but she didn't look convinced. Later that night, Marcus stood by the window, looking out at the street below. Cars passed. Lights flickered. Life moved on. But something had shifted. Something had been pulled into the open. Something that hadn't asked to be seen. His phone buzzed on the table behind him. He didn't turn around right away. Didn't need to. He already knew. This wasn't over. It wasn't even close. And somewhere, in a part of the city that felt very far away now, the woman from the diner was standing in a world that could either fix this or break it completely. The question was, which one would she choose? Victoria didn't answer it right away, because for the first time in years, there wasn't a clear answer. Her world had always been built on decisions that moved quickly. You saw the problem, you fixed it. You applied pressure where it mattered, removed obstacles, corrected the narrative, restored control. This was different. Because every instinct she had was telling her to act. And every consequence so far was telling her that acting might make it worse. Marcus didn't have that luxury. By Monday morning, the few days Gerald had suggested were already running out. He stood at the edge of the construction site, watching as a group of workers moved past him without the usual nods or small talk. Conversations quieted when he got close. Not openly, not aggressively. Just enough. Enough to be noticed. Gerald stepped out of the office trailer, holding his phone again. That had become a pattern. "Reed," he called. Marcus walked over. "I need to be straight with you," Gerald said, his tone lower now, less guarded. "This isn't cooling off." Marcus didn't react. More calls came in, Gerald continued. "One of the clients pulled a meeting this morning, said they didn't want any unnecessary attention tied to the project." Marcus let out a slow breath. "Unnecessary," he repeated. Gerald didn't smile. "You know how this works," he said. "It's not about what's true. It's about what people think is true." Marcus nodded once. He did know. He had always known. "So what are you saying?" Marcus asked, even though he already understood. Gerald looked at him for a long second, then finally said it. "I can't keep you on right now." The words didn't come with anger or judgment, just finality. Marcus didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, letting the moment settle into something real. "How long?" he asked. Gerald shook his head slightly. "I don't know," he said. "Could be a week, could be longer." Marcus nodded again. "All right." Gerald exhaled, relief mixing with something else. Regret, maybe. "This isn't about you," he added. Marcus met his eyes. "I know," he said. But that didn't make it better. Zoe felt it that afternoon. Not because Marcus said anything, but because he didn't. He picked her up from school like always, but he didn't ask the usual questions. Didn't joke about homework. Didn't comment on the way she carried her backpack like it weighed more than it did. He just drove. Hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward. Zoe sat quietly for a few minutes, watching him. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out her notebook. She didn't open it, just held it. "Did something happen?" she asked. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. Zoe waited. "What kind of something?" Marcus pulled up to a red light, the glow washing over the inside of the car. "The kind that makes things harder for a little while," he said. Zoe thought about that. "Did you do something wrong?" Marcus shook his head. No. She nodded slowly. Then why does it feel like you did? Marcus didn't answer right away. Because he didn't have a clean answer. Because the truth didn't fit into something simple. It's not always about that, he said finally. Zoe looked down at her notebook. That's not fair, she said. Marcus let out a quiet breath. No, he agreed. It's not. Across the city, Victoria sat in a conference room she had designed herself. Everything about it reflected clarity. Glass walls, clean lines, no clutter, no distraction. The kind of space where decisions were supposed to feel easy. Her legal team stood at the far end of the table, speaking in careful, measured tones. We can issue a statement, one of them said. Clarify the nature of the meeting. Distance you from any suggestion of impropriety. Victoria didn't respond. Alternatively, another added, we can let it run its course. These things tend to burn out quickly when there's no fuel. Victoria looked down at the tablet in front of her. The headline had spread. Not everywhere, but enough. Enough to reach the people it needed to reach. Enough to affect someone who had never asked to be part of this. What about him? She asked quietly. The room stilled. One of the attorneys cleared his throat. Mr. Reed isn't a public figure, he said. There's limited exposure. The focus is primarily on you. Victoria looked up. That's not what I asked. Another pause. His situation is more vulnerable, the first attorney admitted. He doesn't have the same protections, no team managing the narrative, no insulation. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled lightly in front of her. Then why are we talking about protecting me? She asked. No one answered. Because the answer was obvious. Because that's how it always worked. Victoria stood. The movement was small, but it shifted the room. Do nothing, she said. The attorneys exchanged glances. Ms. Hale, for now, she added. We observe. They hesitated, then nodded. Understood. As they gathered their things, Victoria turned toward the window. The city stretched out beneath her, vast and indifferent. Somewhere in it, a man was losing something because of her. Not intentionally, not directly, but undeniably, and for the first time in a long time. That mattered more than anything in this room. That night, Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table long after Zoe had gone to bed. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel louder. The refrigerator humming. A car passing outside. His phone sitting face down in front of him. He flipped it over. The screen lit up immediately. Missed calls. Unknown numbers. Messages he hadn't opened. He scrolled past them. Stopped on one. A number he recognized. Victoria. He stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone back down. Not yet. Because he didn't know what he would say. Didn't know what she could he that would change anything. Didn't know if hearing her voice would make this easier or harder. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. This wasn't supposed to happen. A dinner. A simple offer. A seat at a table. That was all it had been. And somehow, it had turned into this. Marcus stood, moving toward the window. The city lights flickered in the distance, steady and distant. He thought about that night. About the moment he had stood up. About the choice he had made without thinking. If he had known what it would lead to, would he have done it differently? He let the question sit, then shook his head. No. Because some things weren't about outcomes. They were about who you were when no one was watching, and he hadn't been willing to look away. Not then, not now. But standing there, watching the city move without him, he couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Sometimes doing the right thing came with a cost. The question now wasn't whether he would pay it. He already was. The question was, how much more was it going to take? By Tuesday morning, Marcus had his answer, more than he thought he had left. The call came early, earlier than it should have. He was halfway through pouring coffee when his phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't an unknown number. It was Gerald. Marcus stared at it for a second before answering. Yeah. Gerald didn't waste time. I need you to come in, he said. Now. There was something in his voice, tighter than usual, less guarded, more final. Marcus set the mug down slowly. I'll be there, he said. The job site looked the same. Same unfinished walls, same scattered tools, same noise. But the air felt different. People didn't just quiet down when he walked in this time. They watched. Not openly, but enough. Gerald was waiting near the office trailer again. He didn't motion Marcus inside, didn't try to soften it. He just stood there, hands on his hips, like he had already said this a dozen times in his head, and none of those versions had made it better. I'm sorry, Gerald said. Marcus didn't respond. Contract's gone, Gerald continued. Client pulled out this morning. Said they didn't want to be connected to anything uncertain. Marcus felt something in his chest settle. Not panic, not even anger. Just a quiet, heavy understanding. And that's because of me, he said. Gerald hesitated. It's because of what people think, he said carefully. Marcus nodded. Same answer, different wording. So this isn't a few days anymore, Marcus said. Gerald shook his head. No. The word stayed there between them. Final. Marcus looked around the site one last time, at the wires he had run, the panels he had fixed, the work that would be finished by someone else now. All right, he said. Gerald frowned slightly. That's it? Marcus looked back at him. What else is there? Gerald didn't answer. Because there wasn't anything else. Marcus turned and walked away. No argument. No raised voice. Just gone. Zoe knew before he said anything. He picked her up from school early. That alone was enough. She climbed into the car, her backpack landing softly at her feet. You're not supposed to be here yet, she said. Marcus started the engine. I know. Zoe watched him for a moment, then nodded. "Kay," she said quietly. They drove in silence. The city moved around them like it always did, cars, lights, people rushing somewhere important. But inside the car, everything felt slower. He pulled into a small parking lot near a park, turned off the engine, sat there for a second, then finally said it. I lost the job. Zoe didn't react right away. She just looked at him. Because of the picture? She asked. Marcus nodded. Yeah. Zoe looked down at her hands. That's not fair, she said again. Marcus gave a small, tired smile. No, he said, it's not. Another silence. Longer this time. Are we going to be okay? She asked. Marcus turned toward her. Really looked at her. We always are, he said. It wasn't a promise. It was a habit. Zoe nodded. Because that was what she needed to hear. Even if she wasn't sure she believed it this time, Victoria didn't hear it from Marcus. She heard it from someone else. A report clean, efficient, delivered without emotion. He's been let go, her assistant said quietly, standing near the edge of the desk. Victoria didn't move. Confirmed? She asked. Yes. A pause. The client pulled the contract entirely. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly against the surface of the desk. Because of the coverage? She asked. Yes. The word landed harder than it should have, because it wasn't surprising. It was expected. And somehow, that made it worse. Victoria stood. The movement was sharp enough to make her assistant step back slightly. Get me everything, she said. On what? Who started this? Victoria replied. Who amplified it? Who benefits from it? Her voice didn't rise, but something in it shifted. From observation to action. Marcus didn't answer when she called. He saw her name. Let it ring. Saw it again. Let it go. By the third time, he turned the phone off completely. Not out of anger, not out of blame, but because he didn't know how to have that conversation. Didn't know what it would change. Didn't know if hearing her voice would make it easier, or break something that was still holding together. It happened that night. The confrontation. Not planned, not arranged. Just inevitable. Victoria found him. Not through power, not through pressure, just by showing up. The apartment building wasn't hard to locate, not for someone with her resources, but when she stood outside it, looking up at the worn brick and flickering hallway light, something inside her hesitated. This wasn't her world. There were no assistants here, no buffers, no control, just a door. And whatever waited behind it. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step louder than it should have been. When she reached his door, she didn't knock right away. She just stood there. Then finally, she did. The sound echoed inside. Footsteps followed. The door opened. Marcus stood there, tired, quiet, not surprised. You shouldn't be here, he said. Victoria nodded slightly. I know. He didn't move, didn't invite her in, didn't close the door either. I heard about the job, she said. Marcus looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not anger. Not exactly. Something sharper, yeah, he said. A beat. You hear about a lot of things, don't you? Victoria didn't respond to that. I'm going to fix it, she said instead. That was the moment everything changed. Marcus stepped back slightly. Not to let her in, to create distance. No, he said. Victoria blinked. No? You're not going to fix anything, Marcus said. His voice was calm. Too calm. I can, she said. This isn't complicated. It's a misunderstanding. I can make a call, that's the problem, Marcus cut in. The words weren't loud, but they landed harder than anything he had said before. Victoria stopped. You don't even see it, Marcus continued. You think this is something you can solve because that's what you do. You see a problem, you fix it. I'm trying to help, she said. Marcus let out a quiet breath. Are you? He asked. The question hung there. Sharp, unavoidable. Or are you trying to fix how you felt that night? Victoria went still, completely still. Marcus held her gaze. I didn't help you because I wanted something back, he said. I didn't help you so you could come into my life and start moving things around like they belong to you. I'm not doing that, she said. Aren't you? Marcus replied. A pause. Heavy. Real. Everything was fine, he continued. It wasn't easy, but it was stable. And now, he stopped. Shook his head slightly. Now my kid's getting questions at school, he said. I lost a job I needed, and all of it started the moment you stepped into my world. Victoria felt it. Not as an attack, as truth. Unfiltered, unprotected. What do you want me to do? She asked quietly. Marcus didn't hesitate. Nothing. The word landed like a door closing. Nothing? She repeated. Yeah, he said. No calls, no favors, no fixing. Victoria stood there, the weight of it pressing in. And if doing nothing means things stay broken? She asked. Marcus met her eyes. Then they stay broken, he said. A beat. Because at least they'll be mine. Silence filled the hallway. Zoe's voice carried faintly from inside the apartment, unaware of the moment unfolding just beyond the door. Victoria looked past Marcus for a second, then back at him. And for the first time since all of this started, she didn't have an answer. Because he had taken away the one thing she always relied on. Control. She nodded once, slowly. I understand, she said. Marcus didn't respond. She turned, walked back down the stairs, each step quieter than the last. Inside the apartment, Marcus closed the door, leaning against it for just a second. Eyes closed. Zoe appeared in the hallway, her notebook in her hands. Was that her? She asked. Marcus opened his eyes. Yeah. Zoe studied him. Did you tell her to leave? Marcus nodded. Zoe looked down at her notebook, then back up. Did you mean it? Marcus didn't answer right away, because the truth was harder than the question. Yes, he said finally. Zoe didn't argue, but she didn't look convinced, because somewhere, even she could feel it. That something important had just been pushed away, and neither of them knew yet if it was gone for good. The silence didn't arrive all at once. It settled slowly, like dust in a room where something had been broken, but no one had cleaned it up yet. Victoria felt it first in the elevator. The descent from Marcus's building had been quiet, but contained. There had still been motion, purpose, the feeling that something could still be done. But once the doors closed behind her, the stillness became heavier. No voices, no instructions, no one waiting for her to decide what happened next. Just her reflection in the mirrored walls, staring back with a question she couldn't answer. For the first time in years, she had been told no. Not negotiated, not redirected, not delayed, just no. And worse than that, she had been told why. Victoria stepped out into the night air, colder now, sharper against her skin. The streetlights hummed softly overhead, casting long shadows across the pavement. Her driver was waiting. Of course he was. The car door opened before she reached it. Ms. Hale, he said. She nodded, sliding inside. The door closed. And just like that, her world returned. Leather seats, soft lighting, silence designed to comfort, not confront. But the feeling didn't leave. She leaned her head back against the seat, eyes closing for a brief moment. You don't even see it. Marcus's voice echoed in her mind. Clear, unshaken, accurate, because he wasn't wrong. She had walked into his life with the same instinct she used everywhere else. Identify the problem, Apply the solution. Efficient. Effective. Wrong. The car moved through the city, lights passing in steady rhythm across the window. Victoria opened her eyes, looked out. 3 miles. That was all the distance between them. 3 miles, and a difference she had never truly understood until now. Because in her world, problems were temporary. In his, they stayed. Unless you carried them. Marcus didn't sleep much that night. He lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, the faint glow from the street lamp outside casting shifting patterns across the room. Zoe had gone to bed quietly. Too quietly. She hadn't asked more questions. Hadn't pushed, which somehow made it worse. Marcus turned onto his side, then back again. Rest didn't come. Only thoughts. He replayed the conversation at the door. Every word, every pause. He knew he had been right. He knew what he said needed to be said. But knowing something is right didn't always make it feel good. He sat up, rubbing a hand over his face. From the bedroom, he could hear Zoe shifting in her sleep. A soft sound. Restless. Marcus stood, moving quietly to the doorway. He didn't turn on the light. Just stood there. Watching. She looked smaller when she slept. Less certain. He leaned lightly against the frame. This is what stability looks like, he had told Victoria. Small. Boring. Unremarkable. But it was everything. And now, it felt like it was slipping. Not all at once, but enough. Marcus stepped back, closing the door gently. He didn't know what came next, didn't know how long the money would stretch, didn't know how many more few days he could absorb before they became something else. But he knew this. Whatever happened, he had to hold it together. For her, Victoria returned to her penthouse and didn't turn on the lights. She didn't need to. The city provided enough. She walked to the window, setting her phone down on the counter without looking at it. Missed calls, messages, updates. She didn't check any of them. Instead, she reached for the small piece of paper resting near the edge of the counter. Zoe's drawing. She had left it there days ago. Now it felt like something else entirely. Victoria traced the outline of it with her fingertips. The lines were still simple, still imperfect, but they held something she couldn't ignore. You looked sad the way people look when it's their birthday and no one knows. The memory landed quietly and stayed. Victoria exhaled slowly. She had built everything in her life around certainty, around knowing what mattered, what worked, what moved things forward. This didn't fit into any of that. Because for the first time, the right thing to do was to do nothing. To step back. To let something remain broken because fixing it would make it worse. She had never learned how to do that. Not really. Her phone buzzed behind her. Once, then again. Persistent. She turned, looked at it, hesitated, then picked it up. Her assistant's name lit the screen. Victoria answered. Yes. There's been a development, her assistant said, regarding the article. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Go on. We've traced the original source, she said. It wasn't random. Victoria's eyes opened. What do you mean? A competing firm, the assistant replied. They lost a bid recently, One that involved a subcontractor tied to Mr. Reed's company. Victoria straightened. Say that again. The narrative was pushed intentionally, the assistant continued, to create the appearance of impropriety. It benefits them if the current contract collapses. Victoria felt it click into place. Not chaos, not accident. Design, careless, but deliberate. And they used me to do it, she said quietly. Yes. A pause. And him, the assistant added. Victoria's grip on the phone tightened. For a moment, she said nothing. Because now, it was different. This wasn't just fallout. It was manipulation, and someone had chosen Marcus as the easiest place for it to land. Victoria turned back toward the window. The city stretched out beneath her, unaware, unchanged. Do we have proof? She asked. Yes. How solid? Enough. Another pause. Legal is ready to proceed, the assistant said, if you give the word. Victoria didn't answer right away, because she could already hear Marcus's voice. No calls, no favors, no fixing. She closed her eyes again, held the thought there, then let it go. This isn't about fixing, she said finally. Her voice was different now, quieter, but sharper. It's about truth. The assistant didn't respond. Didn't need to. Move forward, Victoria said. Yes, Ms. Hale. The line went quiet. Victoria lowered the phone slowly. Standing there, in a room designed to give her everything she needed, she realized something she hadn't expected. She wasn't doing this to feel better. She wasn't doing it to restore control. She wasn't even doing it for him. She was doing it because it was wrong. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Across the city, Marcus sat at the kitchen table as the night stretched on. The silence felt different now. Heavier. More settled. But underneath it, something shifted. Not hope. Not yet. Just the faintest sense that the story wasn't finished. That something was still moving. Somewhere beyond what he could see. And this time, he wasn't sure if he should be ready for it. Or afraid of it. The next morning didn't feel different. That was the first sign. Marcus woke up before the alarm, the gray light barely pushing through the thin curtains. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you think nothing had changed. But something had. He could feel it. Not in a way he could name. Just a shift, subtle, unsettled. He moved through his routine the same way he always did. Coffee, toast, Zoe's lunch packed carefully into a worn container that had seen better days. Zoe came out slower than usual, her hair still tangled from sleep, her notebook tucked under her arm like always. You didn't sleep, she said. Marcus gave a small smile. Neither did you. She shrugged. I was thinking. Marcus nodded. Yeah, he said. Me too. They didn't say more. They didn't need to. By mid-morning, the city had already moved on from the story. At least on the surface. New headlines, new distractions. The world always found something else to look at. But underneath that, something was still shifting. Victoria stood in a different kind of room. Not glass, not polished. A law office, quiet, controlled, efficient in a way that felt sharper than her own. Sandra Cole sat across from her, a woman who didn't waste words or time. We've confirmed everything, Sandra said, sliding a file across the table. The firm that pushed the story, Boyle and Associates. They lost a contract tied to the same project your acquaintance was working on. Victoria didn't touch the file. Say it plainly, she said. Sandra met her eyes. They created the narrative, she said, or at least amplified it. They needed the contract destabilized. Your name made it easier. And Marcus? Victoria asked. Collateral, Sandra replied. The word sat heavily in the room. Victoria finally opened the file. Timelines. Call logs, connections. Not complicated, just ugly. They thought no one would look closely, Sandra added. Victoria's gaze hardened slightly. They thought no one with resources would care, she corrected. Sandra didn't disagree. So what happens now? Victoria asked. Sandra leaned back slightly. We can pursue defamation, she said. Force a retraction. Correct the narrative publicly. Victoria nodded slowly. And him? She asked. Sandra paused. That depends, she said carefully. Do you want him involved? Victoria closed the file. No, she said. Not yet. Sandra studied her. This won't stay quiet, she warned, even if we handle it carefully. Victoria stood. I'm not doing this for attention, she said. I know, Sandra replied. Victoria turned toward the window. The city looked the same from here, but she knew better now. Then let's make sure it doesn't feel like it, she said. Marcus found out by accident. Not through a call, not through an explanation. Just a conversation he wasn't meant to hear. He had taken a small freelance job, temporary wiring work in an older building across town. It wasn't much, but it was something. He was in the hallway, tools laid out beside him, when two men walked past. They're pulling it, one of them said. Pulling what? The other asked. That whole story. Legal pressure, I heard. Big kind. Marcus didn't move. From who? A pause. Then, same woman from the article. Hale. Marcus's hand stilled. She's going after Boyle. Hard. The footsteps faded. The conversation disappeared. But the words stayed. Marcus sat back on his heels, staring at the open panel in front of him. He didn't feel relief. Not immediately. What he felt was something else. Complicated. Because he hadn't asked for this, hadn't agreed to it, hadn't even known it was happening. And yet, it was happening. He leaned back against the wall, letting the moment settle. No calls, no favors, no fixing. That's what he had said. And she had listened. At least, in the way she understood how. Marcus exhaled slowly. This wasn't the same as before. This wasn't her stepping in to rearrange his life. This was her, correcting something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. The difference mattered. But it didn't make it simple. By Friday afternoon, the shift became visible. Small at first, a correction buried halfway down a news page, then another, then a statement, short, direct, supported by evidence. The timeline, the truth, the story undone in the same quiet way it had been built. No apology from the people who started it. But the damage began to move in reverse. Gerald called that evening. Marcus stared at the phone for a second before answering. Yeah. Gerald sounded different, less guarded. I saw the update, he said. Marcus didn't respond. They're walking it back, Gerald continued. The whole thing. Looks like it was pushed. Marcus leaned against the counter. Yeah, he said quietly. A pause. I should have waited, Gerald added, before making the call. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. It wouldn't have changed anything, he said. Maybe not, Gerald replied, but it would have been right. Another pause. You want your spot back? Gerald asked. The question landed heavier than Marcus expected, because a week ago, there wouldn't have been a question. Yes, Marcus said. But now, he hesitated. I don't know, he said honestly. Gerald didn't push. Take a day, he said. Call me tomorrow. The line went quiet. Marcus lowered the phone slowly. Standing there in the small kitchen, with the same worn counters and quiet hum of the refrigerator, he realized something. Things were shifting back. The noise was fading. The damage was being undone. But something else had changed. Something that didn't just go back to where it was. Zoe noticed it too. Not the news, not the correction. Just him. You look different, she said, sitting at the table, her notebook open but untouched. Marcus gave a faint smile. Good different or bad different? She considered it. Thinking different, she said. Marcus nodded. That sounds about right. Zoe tapped her pencil lightly against the page. Is it about her? She asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. Then, yeah, he said. Zoe looked down at her drawing. You told her to leave, she said. Marcus nodded. You meant it, yeah. Another pause. But she didn't leave, did she? Zoe asked quietly. Marcus looked at her. Really looked. No, he said. Zoe nodded slowly, like she understood something he was still figuring out. Maybe she just stayed in a different way, she said. Marcus didn't respond. Because for the first time since all of this started, he wasn't sure what staying actually meant anymore. Across the city, Victoria stood alone in her office, the lights dim, the city stretching out beneath her. The statements had been released. The truth was out. The damage, at least the visible kind, was being repaired. But she hadn't called him, hadn't shown up, hadn't tried to explain. Because this time, it wasn't about being seen. It wasn't about being thanked. It was about doing something right and letting it stand on its own. Victoria looked down at her phone. His number sat there, unmoved, untouched. She could call, she could explain, she could try to fix what had broken between them. But she didn't. Because she finally understood something Marcus had been trying to show her from the beginning. Some things didn't need to be managed. They just needed space. And whether that space would bring them back together or push them further apart wasn't something she could control. Not this time. And that was the hardest part. The city didn't change overnight. It never did. But the noise around Marcus Reed began to fade. Slowly, almost carefully. The calls stopped first, then the looks, then the quiet distance that had settled around him like something permanent. By Monday, it was as if the story had been replaced by something else, something newer, louder, easier to follow. The world had moved on. But Marcus hadn't. He stood outside the job site that morning, hands in his jacket pockets, staring at the building like it might give him an answer if he looked long enough. Same unfinished walls, same doors, same work waiting inside. Gerald stepped out a moment later, spotting him immediately. You came back, Gerald said. Marcus nodded. Yeah. Gerald studied him for a second. You hear about the retraction? I heard, Marcus replied. Gerald let out a slow breath. They came clean faster than I expected, he said. Doesn't usually happen like that. Marcus didn't respond, because he knew why it had, even if no one had said it out loud. Gerald shifted his weight. Look, about last week, he started. Marcus shook his head slightly. It is what it is, he said. No, Gerald replied. It isn't. I made a call based on noise, not truth. That's on me. Marcus looked at him, really looked, and saw something he hadn't expected. Not guilt. Responsibility. That mattered. You offering the job back? Marcus asked. Gerald nodded. If you want it, he said. Same terms, same crew. A pause. And this time, it stays yours. Marcus exhaled slowly. The answer should have been simple. It should have been automatic. But it wasn't. Because something had changed. Not just the job. Him. He thought about Zoe. About the question she had asked. Are we going to be okay? He thought about the apartment, the routine, the small, steady life he had built piece by piece, and how close it had come to slipping. Then he thought about Victoria, about the way she had stood at his door, the way she had walked away when he asked her to, the way she had stayed anyway. Just not in the way he expected. Marcus nodded once. Yeah, he said. I'll take it. Gerald let out a breath he'd been holding. Good, he said. We could use someone who knows what they're doing. Marcus almost smiled. Almost. That afternoon, Zoe noticed the difference before he said anything. He picked her up on time. Not early, not late. Exactly when he always had. That alone told her something had shifted back. You're not thinking as much, she said, sliding into the passenger seat. Marcus glanced at her. That so? She nodded. Your face is normal again. He let out a quiet laugh. I'll take that as a good thing. It is, she said. A pause. Did you get the job back? Marcus looked at the road ahead. Yeah, he said. Zoe smiled. Not wide, not loud, just certain. I knew it, she said. Marcus glanced over. You did? She nodded. Because she fixed it. Marcus didn't respond right away. Because the word still didn't sit right. Fixed. That wasn't what it had felt like. It wasn't like that, he said finally. Zoe tilted her head. Then what was it like? Marcus thought about it. About the silence. About the space she had given him. About the way the truth had come back without her standing in front of it. She made sure it wasn't broken in the first place, he said. Zoe considered that. Then nodded. That's better, she said. Marcus didn't argue. Because she wasn't wrong. Victoria didn't hear from him. Not that day. Not the next. And she didn't expect to. She had done what needed to be done. Not for recognition. Not for closure. Just because it was right. And now she waited. Not actively. Not anxiously. Just without reaching. That was new. She sat in her office late that evening, the city glowing beneath her like it always did. But something about it felt different now. Less distant, less controlled, more real. Her phone sat on the desk in front of her. Silent. She didn't pick it up, didn't check it. Because this part, this space between action and outcome, wasn't hers to manage. Not anymore. It happened 3 days later. Not with a call, not with a message, just a moment. Victoria was walking through one of her properties, another restaurant, quieter than the rooftop, less polished, but no less deliberate. She moved through the space without announcement, the staff adjusting subtly as they noticed her presence. Not fear, not exactly. Awareness, respect. She was used to it. It didn't feel the same anymore. As she passed through the dining area, something caught her attention. A small table near the window. A man sitting with a young girl. Simple. Unremarkable. Except she stopped. Because she recognized them. Marcus looked up first. Not surprised, not startled, just aware. Victoria didn't move closer right away. Didn't speak. She just stood there, a few feet away, like the first time. Zoe spotted her next. Her face lit up instantly. "You came back," she said, as if it had always been expected. Victoria smiled faintly. "Looks like I did." Marcus watched her for a moment longer, then nodded once. Not an invitation, not a rejection, just acknowledgement. Victoria stepped forward. "You mind if I sit?" she asked. The question was different this time. Not assumed, not offered, asked. Marcus glanced at Zoe. Zoe didn't hesitate. "There's always room," she said. Marcus exhaled quietly, then pulled out the chair. "Yeah," he said. "There is." Victoria sat down. No introductions, no explanations, no mention of what had happened. Because it was already understood. The table felt the same. Small, close, real. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, it felt like something had been put back. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Zoe reached for her notebook, flipping it open to a blank page. "Can I draw you again?" she asked. Victoria looked at her, then at Marcus, then back at Zoe. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'd like that." Marcus leaned back in his chair, watching the moment unfold. Different now, quieter, but stronger. Because this time, no one had to prove anything. No one had to fix anything. They were just there. And maybe that was the part none of them had understood before. That the most important things didn't come from control or power or even intention. They came from choosing to stay, even when it would have been easier not to. The rain returned that night. Not heavy, not loud, just steady enough to be heard against the windows, tapping softly like something that didn't need attention to exist. Marcus's apartment felt warmer than usual. Not because anything had changed. The same worn couch, the same small kitchen, the same narrow hallway that carried sound too easily from one room to the next. But the space felt fuller. Zoe sat at the table, her notebook open, pencil moving with quiet focus. The light above her cast a soft glow across the page, catching the small movements of her hand as she sketched. Victoria sat across from her, not as a guest. Not exactly. Just there. No coat folded neatly at her side this time. No hesitation in the way she held herself. She had arrived without anything. No wine, no gifts, no explanation. That had been the hardest part. Standing in her own kitchen earlier, trying to decide what to bring. And realizing that bringing something would have been the same instinct Marcus had asked her to leave behind. Control. Compensation. Correction. So she had come empty-handed. And somehow, that had felt heavier than anything she could have carried. "You're moving different," Zoe said without looking up. Victoria blinked. "Different how?" Zoe paused her pencil, thinking. "Slower," she said. "Like you're not trying to finish something." Victoria glanced toward Marcus. He was at the stove, stirring something simple in a pan. The smell of garlic and onions filled the small space, familiar and grounding in a way she hadn't expected. "I think she's learning," Marcus said quietly. Victoria let out a soft breath that almost turned into a laugh. "I think I am," she admitted. Zoe nodded, satisfied, and went back to her drawing. The three of them fell into an easy rhythm. Not forced, not planned, just natural. Marcus moved around the kitchen with quiet confidence, the kind that came from doing something enough times that it stopped requiring thought. He reached for things without looking, adjusted the heat without hesitation, worked through the process like it belonged to him. Victoria watched him for a moment, not because it was impressive, but because it was real. There was no performance in it, no awareness of being observed, just presence. "You cook a lot?" she asked. Marcus shrugged slightly. "Enough," he said. "Comes with the territory." Victoria nodded. "Of raising a kid? Of keeping things together," he replied. She didn't respond to that, because she understood it now in a way she hadn't before. Not fully, but enough. Zoe pushed her notebook toward Victoria. "Done," she said. Victoria leaned forward, looking down at the page. The drawing was simple, like the first one. 3 figures at a table. A small one, a tall one, and another that sat somewhere in between. The details weren't perfect, but the feeling was. They were leaning slightly toward each other. Not posed, not arranged, just connected. "What's this one called?" Victoria asked. Zoe tapped the bottom of the page, where she had written in careful, uneven letters, "The table that stayed." Victoria swallowed, her throat tightening slightly. "I like that," she said. Zoe smiled. "I knew you would." Marcus set the plates down on the table, dividing the food without comment. "Eat," he said. Victoria hesitated for a fraction of a second, then reached for her fork. No hesitation after that. They ate the way people do when there's nothing to prove. No rush, no silence that needed to be filled, just conversation that moved when it wanted to and rested when it didn't. At one point, Zoe looked up at Victoria. "Do you still have that big house?" she asked. Marcus gave her a look. "Zoe." "What?" she said. "I'm just asking." Victoria smiled slightly. "I do," she said. Zoe nodded. "Is it quiet?" Victoria paused, then nodded back. "Yeah," she said. "It is." Zoe thought about that, then said, "You should get a dog." Marcus let out a quiet laugh. "That's your solution to everything." "It works," Zoe said. Victoria smiled. "I'll think about it." "Good," Zoe replied. "Because dogs make it harder to feel like nobody's home." The words lingered, unspoken, but understood. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the rain had softened to a light mist, Victoria stood near the window, looking out at the street below. It wasn't much of a view. A few parked cars, a flickering streetlight, the quiet movement of people heading somewhere else, but it felt enough. Marcus stepped up beside her. Not too close, not distant either. Different view, he said. Victoria nodded. Yeah. A pause. You didn't call, he added. Victoria glanced at him. No, she said. Why not? She thought about it. Because she could have. Because she had wanted to. I didn't think it was mine to control, she said. Marcus considered that, then nodded to her. Another pause. Thank you, he said quietly. Victoria looked at him. For what? For doing it the way you did, he replied. Not making it about you. The words landed gently, but they meant more than anything he had said before. Victoria exhaled slowly. I didn't get it at first, she admitted. I thought helping meant fixing. Marcus looked out the window again. Most people do. She nodded. But you were right, she said. It wasn't about fixing. It was about not letting something wrong stay wrong. Marcus didn't respond right away. Then, yeah, he said. That sounds about right. They stood there for a moment longer, not speaking, not needing to. Because something had settled between them. Not an agreement, not a resolution. Just understanding. When Victoria left, Zoe walked her to the door. Are you coming back? She asked. Victoria smiled. Yeah, she said. I think I am. Zoe nodded. Good. Marcus stood a few steps behind, watching quietly. Victoria paused at the door, looking back at the small apartment, the table, the space that had changed something she hadn't even realized was missing. You know, she said, turning slightly, I've been to a lot of expensive places. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I figured. She smiled faintly. But this, she said, glancing at the table, this might be the most valuable one. Marcus didn't argue. Because he understood what she meant. Not in dollars, not in status, but in something harder to define, something that couldn't be bought, only found. And only if you were willing to see it. Victoria stepped out into the night, the cool air wrapping around her as she walked toward the waiting car. The city looked the same, but she didn't. Not anymore. Because somewhere between a denied table and a quiet dinner, something had changed. Not her wealth, not her power, but something deeper. Something she couldn't rebuild with money. Something Marcus hadn't taken from her, but had given back. Inside the apartment, Zoe closed her notebook and looked at her father. She's different, she said. Marcus nodded. Yeah, he said. Zoe tilted her head. Are we? Marcus thought about that, about everything that had happened, about what had been lost and what had been found. Yeah, he said, we are. Zoe smiled. Good. Because she had been right from the beginning. Sometimes, the most important moments don't come with noise, or attention, or anything that looks like power. They come quietly, in the form of a seat offered, a choice made, a person who decides not to look away. And in the end, that's the kind of thing that changes everything. Not all at once, but enough, because the truth was simple. The world didn't change that night in the restaurant, or the day the story broke, or even the moment it was corrected. It changed the moment someone chose to see someone else and act on it, without expecting anything in return. And that, more than anything else, was what made it matter. It wasn't the restaurant, or the money, or the headlines. It was the moment Marcus pulled out a chair and said, "Sit with us," and chose to see someone when everyone else looked away. This story reminds us that one quiet, uncalculated act can carry more weight than 1,000 carefully planned moves. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't fixing someone's life, it's refusing to let them feel invisible. So the next time you see someone standing alone like Victoria was that night, don't overthink it. Just show up like Marcus did, because that one small moment might stay with them longer than you'll ever know. Have you ever helped someone and never realized how much it meant to them? Tell me below. And if this story stayed with you, there's another one coming that might hit even closer to home.